So I did. Pushing aside the thin, red curtains, I stared through the stained glass into the eyes of my long dead, or so I thought, best friend. For a moment I became lost, and as her eyes met mine, they seemed to smile, glowing a bright red that outdid the new red curtains I had purchased only 2 weeks earlier. Her figure couldn't be made out completely in the darkness, but my mind had already been made up. I owed her this much at least. Whatever happens next, I owed her this much. The apartment was a much older design than maybe most of you are familiar with. The cracked stained glass window went from the ceiling to the floor, now only open a crack at the very bottom. Something like this would probably be against the regulation nowadays, and was just another reason for the old apartment building to be shut down completely. I had read a story when I was younger about a little girl falling to her death from such a flawed design. As I reached under the handle and began to pull upwards, I wondered if this might be the very apartment where it had happened. Silly thought, I know, but it was there anyway. I thought of how easy it would be for a person to fall to their death from such a place. With a creak, I pushed the window open completely, a warm breeze making its way eerily into my bedroom. Grace smiled, and her red eyes made me step back into the corner near my bed. Looking up at the silver cross next to me, I figured it wouldn't do any good if things went bad. She wasn't a vampire, after all. She was something else entirely. Something dead, yet alive. Something ancient, yet young. Very young, I witnessed, the monster's figure now coming more into view. Grace was still a little girl, just as she had been that night many years ago. After she had been taken, life had continued for me, school and college and new friends. For Grace, life had ended that night that she saved me. Grace took a step forward into the apartment, her wet tentacles retreating momentarily under her clean white dress stitched with yellow dandelions. "Mind if I sit down?" she asked. "Please do," I replied cordially. Her strong hands reached out and grasped the old rocker my mom had given me before passing. She sat, and something caught her eye. An old photo of us two together. As she picked it up to take a closer look, her eyes changed from a bright, piercing red to the pale green I had remembered. It had been taken the summer before she died by her father. In the picture, the two of us were standing at the edge of a pond near our home, embracing each other like sisters, and smiling. We had always been smiling. Grace's eyes looked over at me. You saved this, huh?" There was silence for a moment. Of course I saved it. And then sadness. "You're my best friend, Grace." "Was your best friend," she interjected, and for a moment I could see the underlying resentment for the first time. I couldn't blame her. My friend's eyes turned red again. Though the room was only partially lit, I could see the outline of a tentacle making its way slowly across the floor towards me. I was 10 or so feet away, and it stopped just a few inches away from my ankle as she spoke again. "So, why do you let me in, Jessica?" Her fiery red pupils examined me closely. "Want to become like we are?" she continued, grinning as the tentacle inched its way closer. I could feel it at the edge of my skin now, as if it were a creature sniffing its prey before biting deep. I wanted to say I'm sorry, Grace. Surprise fell over her face. "You're sorry?" she repeated, her full figure coming into view. An endless series of tentacles filled the room now, fluttering angrily. The ceiling fan crashed onto the floor as they slid over it, and I watched in horror as the largest tentacle grasped the photo of us together and shattered the glass frame. I have something better than sorry, Jessica. I'm going to make you like I am. You're going to see what it's like to... It was my turn to interrupt, and I wanted to keep my promise this time. You wanted to what? She asked quietly, but there was a rage underneath her words. For the first time, I could feel the tentacles wrap quickly around my ankles and begin to dig in. I'm so sorry, Grace. I continued, pulling out the revolver I had concealed in my jacket and shooting her twice in the chest. There was no scream of pain as the tentacles retreated back under her dress, nor any look of betrayal. My best friend only fell back into the corner of the floor and stared up at me. There was no anger anymore. Her eyes changed completely now from the bright red of a monster back to the pale green of her youth. I walked over, tears now falling easily from my face onto the floor below. She spoke more quietly now as the life began to drain from her body. Don't be sorry, Jessica, she whispered, her pale green eyes looking into mine. I could tell she wanted to say something else, tears now falling down her face as well. But she was no longer able to. My friend didn't have long left, I realized, and she was only able to make one last gesture. Reaching out towards the broken picture I had kept of us as children, her eyes met mine one last time. It was cracked and broken now, facing downwards on the floor in front of us. I did as she asked, lifting the photo from the floor and placing it into her hands carefully. She smiled. And then I sat down with her, protecting Grace like I should have done so many years ago. I put my face up against hers, and we both gazed downwards onto the old photo of us together. We had just been children, but even then, Grace and I knew that we were best friends forever.
Kuchisaki Onna is the legend of a Japanese woman, mutilated by her jealous samurai husband who murdered her for infidelity, scarring her horribly and leaving her repulsive. Her jealous ghost still haunts places in Japan, usually on foggy nights. She wears a surgical mask, and she'll approach people and ask slyly, "Anata wa watashi ga utsukushi tumoimatsu ka?" In other words, "Do you think I'm beautiful?" The person usually responds, "Yes." She then pulls down her mask to reveal an ear-to-ear grin, cut by her jealous husband to mark her for her life. Even like this, she will persist. If you answer no, she will reveal a pair of scissors and cut the same gruesome smile into your own face. If you answer yes, she'll disappear. And the second you go home, she'll reappear at your door and finish the job, and will be unlikely to stop. She has been seen from the 1970s to the early 2000s. Often seen lurking.
Words, my father speaks to me on his death. In the typical sense, most deathbed scenes are found with the family surrounding the dying. There are tears of sorrow and pain falling for the lost. There are final speeches and goodbyes spoken to the departed, and hands held whilst the comfortably lain body drifts into its final slumber. But here instead, we find ourselves in a bare room. Here, my father and I are surrounded by not family saying goodbyes, but by metal bars, airtight glass, and officers of the law. I watch from my seat on one side of the glass as the lethal injection begins. The gray-haired man with greasy and chalky skin stares back with wide eyes from the other side. Those eyes keep me entranced as the fatal cocktail slowly moves through the tubing attached to his arms. He smiles one last time at me with gritted, yellow, and broken teeth before he seizes up. My father jerks his head back in a maddening thrash, and froth begins forming at the corners of his mouth. The sight is unbearable to watch, as the man I once knew as Kenneth West, father, mentor, and friend, was reduced to a drooling dead husk, strapped to a chair. I think back to where it began, and how it did not begin with him. My grandfather, Bernard West, had been an antiquarian of sorts, and researched a great many subjects in his collection of volumes and books. His greatest hobby had been extensive research into our family history, due to the fact that the information regarding our lineage seemingly stopped in the 1850s with his ancestor, Victor West, and his coming to America from France. Upon arrival in America, Victor had renamed our family's surname to West, abandoning our original one to obscurity. Bernard had spent many years attempting to decipher where the trail led after that, and always came up cold. However, in 1975, he came into possession of a manuscript that detailed an interesting account regarding a soldier by name of Jean Molyneux during the time of Napoleon's expedition into Egypt in 1799. The manuscript detailed that in that year, the expedition had been mapping what was referred to as the Valley of the Kings, a necropolis where the bodies of nobility and regality were laid to rest before their spirits went to the afterlife. Of course, those revered dead were surrounded with the riches and treasures to ease their journey and enjoy in their eternal reward. According to the document, Jean Molyneux had been among the expedition, and during the mapping, he had managed to uncover an undefiled tomb by himself. While this should have been a grand discovery, there had been greed in the man's eyes. Instead of reporting his findings, he pilfered the riches for himself and caved the tomb in. His sin was quickly found out, and he was soon to be caught. He left a majority of his ill-gotten gains behind only to flee into the desert with a single item: a golden necklace emblazoned with a crocodile face, crowned with a lion's mane. The creature pictured would later be discovered by Bernard to be the depiction of Amit, not an Egyptian god, but a demoness, whose purpose was to devour the hearts of the impure. What purpose it held in the tomb seemed to be a mystery at the time. Here the manuscript detailed the subsequent events that led to the eventual striking of Jean Molyneux's name of anything but his status as thief and murderer. Once Jean returned to France, it is recorded that he returned to his family not as a man of decent personage, but as a creature of appetites. A once lovable, albeit mousy man had become a lecherous and ungodly thing, barely qualified as civilized. The very night he arrived home, he murdered both his wife and daughter with an axe, and was only stopped by his son Philippe. The son had crippled and subdued Jean with the very axe meant to end his life. Jean was cast into shackles and imprisoned. In an interview, Jean revealed that on his journey from Egypt back to his home, he not only committed numerous other murders, but revealed that he had the utmost abominable plans beyond just killing his family, but also devouring them. Philippe was distraught at the news and further confession of his father's thievery from ancient tombs. Philippe made no arguments for his father to be shown mercy and begged to be at the forefront at his execution. Philippe further refused to inherit anything and demanded the treacherous patriarch be buried ignobly with his ill-gotten pendant. Here the account stated that Philippe Molyneux and his children and further descendants could not bear the weight of the shame placed upon them by their progenitor, and as such in 1854, during the Crimean War, Victor Molyneux decided to flee to the Americas with his children and wife, and upon arrival promptly changed his name to Victor West, a silly albeit successful attempt to distance himself from the family's dark past. Bernard West was ecstatic and passed the information to my father, Kenneth, who in turn passed the information down to me and my sister Lily. Kenneth became entranced with the idea of the ancient Egyptian jewelry that his ancestor had been buried with, and began researching where the tomb of Jean Molyneux may be located. In 1995, he reportedly found the location and flew to France. He left me, my sister, and my mother Maria to be taken care of by my grandfather, Bernard. We expected my father to be gone at worst a month. Little did we know that years would roll by without a single word of where he was or what had become of him. As time passed, we began to assume him dead. However, in 2005, he came home, but he did not come home as the man we knew. Kenneth had always been a man who kept himself well taken care of. He had always been clean-cut and properly attired. However, here, standing at the door, was a man who appeared to have forgotten the terms of good hygiene. Long, dirty brown hair that was flaked with patches of gray covered his head. His skin was unwashed and showed signs of numerous altercations. Had it not been for a clue, we may have dismissed this man as a vagrant. Around his neck bore the necklace of gold. Emblazoned on it was the crocodile's head, crowned with a lion's mane. My father appeared to be almost in a delirious and hallucinogenic state, barely able to form coherent words other than that he was famished and extremely tired. Occasionally, he'd blather on about great feasts before him, but never went into detail. We did our best to clean him and care for him as we would have an invalid. I remember my grandfather Bernard weeping that night for what had become of his son. Once all was done, we put my father to rest in a guest room and put ourselves to bed with uncertain plans of what to do next. I awoke to the sounds of my father screaming in the middle of the night. I scrambled out of bed and ran to where I believed the sound originated from. I found my father and my family in the kitchen. Or to say, what was left of my family. My sister, mother, and grandfather lay on the kitchen table, dead, their chest cavities torn open and insides exposed to the world. Crimson liquid fell every which way off the table's surface and pooled on the floor. My father stood there, nude and covered in their blood. In his hand he held a red and purple organ, and as he brought it to his mouth, I recognized it for what it was. A heart. From there, I remember grabbing something off the counter, the toaster I think, and lunging after him. Luck was on my side as he was enthralled in his grotesque meal, and did not see my attack coming. Just as I was about to make contact, he let out another howl and screamed one phrase. "Our meat condemns us!" and then I struck him in the head. I did not kill him, but subdued the madman, just like my ancestor Philippe had done with his father Jean. Now we are here. After the police, legal proceedings, and all the time I had to wait, I followed in Philippe's footsteps again, in judgment that my father is to be executed. Here I am now, just as Philippe once did, watching a father die for his crimes, and most likely for his crimes he never confessed to. I hang my head in Pyrrhic victory for what's occurred, and am roused by a tap on my shoulder to finalize items. In a daze, I go through the tedium of answering questions and filling out documents before I am given a small sealed plastic bag. The bag contained the one item my father was in possession of at the time of his arrest. Leering back at me, its face pressed against the transparent material, was the crocodile head crowned with the lion's mane. I could not help but think that the toothy grin of Amit was smiling hungrily at me.
It's funny in a way. I swore I'd never be one of those people who jump to something so permanent, but here I am, staring into the bedroom mirror. It never got mounted properly, and I just sort of leaned it against the top of the dresser. Regardless, my eyes slowly met their doppelganger in the reflection. It's not me, not in any sense that I can register, yet all I can think of is the taste of pennies. Now my mind flashed back to when I was around 9 years old. A friend of mine bet that I couldn't fit a whole roll of pennies in my mouth. I collected from that bet 50 cents in the old gush, and it earned me $3 bills. I laughed about the peculiar memory, but I caught myself. It's odd how closely emotions can follow one another. Just as soon as I choke back my humor, tears begin to stream down my cheeks. How in the hell did I get here? I slipped the barrel from between my lips and let it rest on the side of the bed. At the exact moment the heavy chunk of metal hit the blanket, a loud thud hit the bedroom door. One way or another, I mumbled to myself. Then I looked up again to find half a smirk on my face. It's sort of funny how we find ourselves not caring anymore when backed into a corner, and when all options are taken away from you. Another clash at the door. It's locked, but that won't hold them back for long, and now all I can think of is Tara.